We have the account of our Lord's transfiguration. The presence of Moses and Elijah symbolized to us, or reiterated to the three apostles that were with our Lord, that Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, that he is indeed the long-awaited Messiah. The very transfiguration of our Lord, this dazzling white and just the glory emanating from him, also reminds the three apostles that Jesus is God, that he is God incarnate, and so he was manifesting some of his divine glory. Now, the apostles, they already knew this. They had seen his miracles, his wisdom, casting out demons and escaping every trap that is laid for him. So they already know this, but our Lord wanted to reaffirm them in this knowledge, but also because he was preparing them for the scandal of the cross. In other words, he wanted them to remain faithful even when things would become difficult, even when they would be tempted to lose faith. And actually, that is what ended up happening. So all the apostles except one abandoned our Lord when he is arrested and he undergoes his passion. Only John the Evangelist remained at the foot of the cross. Spiritual authors point out that very often what our Lord did with these three apostles who were the closest to him, he does with us, especially if we make the effort to be close to him. In other words, the more close we are to God, the more intense our prayer life, the more we withdraw our minds and hearts from sinful things and worldly things and focus on divine things, the more likely God will reveal things to us. So spiritual authors point out that very often God will reveal things to us in prayer or give us certain consolations, revelations, in order to strengthen us in our faith and sometimes to prepare us for something that might be coming in the future. And those of you who take your prayer life seriously, you've probably experienced this on your own. I know I have. So as a priest, we move occasionally from parish to parish. And, sometimes it's difficult. And I remember one particular occasion, I was just very worried, very apprehensive about this move. And it was the day that I was scheduled to move. And I remember praying that morning, and I just felt God's presence, and I felt so many consolations in prayer. And I saw that as a kind of reminder that God is with me, that I don't need to worry. And sure enough, even though it was difficult to move, it went fairly well, and I was able to handle it. And some people point out that God does this for us as individuals, but he also sometimes does it for us as a people. So when we think, for example, of the great miracles or the apparitions, for example, the many apparitions, or especially world-known apparitions such as Our Lady appearing in Lourdes, or many Eucharistic miracles, these affirm our faith. And sometimes these manifestations are also a kind of warning, kind of a wake-up call to mankind. And especially when we consider the apparitions of Our Lady at Fatima in 1917. And if you recall, Our Lady started to appear on May 13th, and she would appear every month. And she promised that on the last day, on October the 13th, she would manifest a sign so that people will believe. And sure enough, 70,000 people gathered to witness this miracle. There were many scoffers who were non-believers. They just came to mock these foolish Catholics who thought there would be a miracle. Newspaper reporters came out. It was a big event. 70,000 people had gathered, and yes, there was this great miracle of the sun. It was reported in the local newspapers, even though at that time the newspapers were opposed to Christianity. They were already under the influence of communism. And in fact, apparently this event was reported all around the world. It was so significant. And not only that, Our Lady of Fatima predicted that if people did not stop offending God, there would be another worse war to punish mankind. So she made this prediction in 1917, and World War II broke out in 1939. And just before World War II, Our Lady revealed to Lucia, the eldest of the three children that she was appearing to in Fatima, that on the night, when she sees a night illumined by a strange light, she will know that this war is about to begin. Sure enough, just before World War II broke out, the aurora borealis, which is normally like the northern lights, which is only in northern parts of the hemisphere, was seen all over Europe, even very far south. And scientists couldn't explain it because normally they make a correlation between the sun's rays and activity and the Earth's atmosphere, but they just couldn't explain it. It was miraculous. People thought it was the end of the world. So both of these events are kind of like a wake-up call to mankind. And it's interesting when we consider the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima and the angel of Portugal, the angel St. Michael, that appeared to the children the year before Our Lady started appearing. The essential truths of our faith are reiterated. Belief in the Eucharist. The angel taught the three children a prayer to make reparation for all the sacrilegious communions, the lack of belief in our Lord's true presence in the Eucharist. Our Lady, revealed to them the reality of hell. She spoke about individuals who are still in purgatory, so the truths of heaven, hell, purgatory, the Eucharist, and the importance of purity. Our Lady revealed that more souls go to hell for sins of impurity than for any other sins. She also said that fashions will be introduced that will lead many into sin. In other words, she was warning the people of that time of future events. And we see these events fulfilled. We see people falling away from the practice of the faith. Many Catholics no longer believe in our Lord's true presence in the Eucharist. Many don't believe in the reality of hell. So this was a kind of wake-up call for mankind. But Our Lady, interestingly enough, also warned about Russia. And the children had no idea what Russia meant. The children were very young. They weren't educated. They thought it referred to an old lady. Now, at that time, Russia was not doing very well. And it was actually the same month in 1917 when the communists took control. They overthrew the existing government and they took control of the governance in Russia. And under communism, they killed millions of people, their own people, because communism is a totalitarian system. And Our Lady asked for the consecration of Russia, and she warned that Russia will spread her errors, and there will be wars, and nations will be annihilated, and that there will be famines and plagues and all kinds of terrible things. And it seems that these things are still being fulfilled. And it ought to cause us great concern. We ought to be motivated to look more into these prophecies made by Our Lady. Various communist leaders in countries where communism failed point out that the reason it failed is because communism, well, it's a political system, it's an economic system, but it has to be worldwide in order for it to be truly successful. And whether you're aware of it or not, there are many people pushing for world governance. In other words, to have a one world government. And you've probably heard of the Great Reset also, or Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum. These are not conspiracy theories, but he talks about the Great Reset. He's even written a book about the Great Reset. And to reset means the present system has to collapse, it has to break. And it's been pointed out that they've taken advantage of the coronavirus pandemic and perhaps now even with the war between Russia and the Ukraine and how that's going to affect world economies. Economies are not doing well. We're on the verge of economic collapse. So a great reset is what they're proposing. And this ought to cause us great concern because, having a one world government is not bad in and of itself, provided you have good leaders or a good leader. But the problem is that if people have a communistic worldview, in other words, they're atheists, they don't believe in God, and they believe that we're just animals that have evolved, that we're expendable, then it's not surprising that we see how in communist countries, the leaders, how they're treating their people. I mean, think of China, think of North Korea. So this ought to cause us great concern. And in regards to the Great Reset, they've pointed out that they're taking advantage of the weaknesses of capitalism, of capitalistic systems at this present time. And usually in these communist countries or in a communist system, what tends to happen is people lose their freedoms. If you don't abide by the party policy, your life could be in danger. And usually in these communist systems, religion is suppressed, especially Catholicism, because they see Catholicism as having its own governance because we have a hierarchy, we have the bishops, we have the Pope. They want complete control of everyone. And also, as Catholics, we're not always politically correct. And they want everybody to conform, to be identical. So whether this is happening now or not is debatable. But the evidence is there. You could look these things up. But the whole point is that perhaps, just perhaps, God was trying to warn us, trying to warn mankind by means of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima, the miracle of the sun, as well as the night that was illumined by this strange light, warning us that perhaps the errors of Russia, in other words, these communist systems, are indeed going to endanger us and our freedoms, including our freedom of religion. Now, in order to prepare for this, or even if it were not to happen, all of us are going to have to face trials or tribulations of one sort or another. And often we don't like to face difficulties. But wouldn't it be nice to have the strength of God, the graces of God to enable us to deal with those difficulties? Well, of course it would. And so we ought to learn to be close to our Lord, to have a very close relationship with God. Because if we do, we will be strengthened in our faith. And we will have the courage and the strength to face whatever difficulties, whatever challenges may await us in the future.